Welcome to Loaded and Rolling. I'm your host, Thomas Wasson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about fleet safety. It's a super important topic, and if you haven't paid attention, it's a big deal. There was a recent study that we're going to be talking with the folks from Nauto about how their safety tech stacks up against others and how it is much faster at reducing the ability, making sure that you can see what you need to see and letting you know. Why this is a big deal is estimated by NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, that around 3,000 people die from traffic fatalities every year. To give you an example, the world's worst airline disaster, which involved two jets colliding in 1977, killed around 583 people. So imagine you have 5 of the worst airline disasters every single year, and that just happens to be on the roadway. So it's a huge issue that needs to get more attention. And luckily, we've got folks who are going to give us more attention. So without further ado, we're going to catch up again with Dr. Stefan Heck. He's the founder and CEO of Nauto. And Stefan, it's been a minute. Y'all have been cooking up some stuff, and super excited to get to reconnect.
It's great to be back on. Thanks.
And let's talk about this safety study. It was conducted by the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. We'll have to get a graphics if we'll find one. Big sprawling campus, has a track, the entire shebang. Give us a little bit of backstory about this study and what kind of went into it.
Yeah, so Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, or VTTI as they call themselves, is really the premier academic research institution that works on safety and driving behavior. And they do a lot of work for vehicle manufacturers, insurance companies, as well as different kinds of component and systems makers. As you already alluded to, they have extensive facilities, test tracks. They're also, it's probably not as well known, they originated something called naturalistic driving study, I think now 15 years ago, something like that, where they essentially instrumented instrumented vehicles with measuring systems, cameras, sensors, and they studied how people actually drive in the real world. And it was a radical, innovative idea at the time because people didn't really know what actually happens on the road, right? It was either anecdotes from people of what they experienced, or it was police reports, which we all know is kind of after the fact, right? The police officer typically wasn't there when the accident happened. And of course, people always, when they do self-reported, they make things more favorable for themselves, right? They give the best version of what happened. Nobody admits they screwed up usually. And so the funny part is this kind of closes an arc, because 10 years ago when I founded Nauto, we actually used their naturalistic driving study that they had done as guide for what are the biggest risks. It was one of the first studies that really showed just how massive a problem distraction is and how frequent it is and how serious the outcomes are from distraction. And we used their list of risk topics and how significant each one was, how much each one contributes to crashes, as a sort of initial roadmap guide for what we had to build to solve these problems. So it's great to come back 10 years later for us, because Nauto was founded 10 years ago, to have them do a thorough assessment. They've got a whole methodology that they've used on other dash cameras, other safety technologies. They basically define a set of risk scenarios, pedestrian crossing, the driver being distracted, a driver falling asleep, a vehicle in front braking, all the sort of normal things that you'd encounter driving around. But they do it under controlled, timed conditions. So they make sure every time they run the test, it's exactly the same according to their protocol. And a year ago, they tested a number of the more traditional dash cameras out there. And we asked them, hey, can you use the same protocol to test our system as well? We want to see how we do. And we were quite delighted. The results are basically that for most of the risks, we detected 100%. And I want to pause there for a second, because it's really pretty stunning. They test, at different speeds. They test daytime, nighttime conditions. So they really try to test some of the corner cases that are hard. It gets much harder seeing pedestrians at night, for example, or at dusk. And we're very proud that we picked up for almost all the cases 100%. There's a few where we're in the kind of 90% range. That's something that in our design philosophy is really important, because the worst thing you can do is distract a driver with a false alert. People get really upset. We have a common name for it, which is called backseat driving, right? Nobody likes to be told Oh, you got to watch out for that. And either you've seen it already or it's not there, which is even worse. But the second thing, which you already mentioned, that was equally impressive and probably even more important in the real world, is the timing with which we alerted. For most of the risk factors, we can alert the driver within a few seconds, 3 seconds, 2.5 seconds. Um, and if you look at the tests they've done on competitive technologies, sometimes it's 6 seconds, but sometimes it's even 11, 12, 13, 14 seconds. And as we all know from driving, 14 seconds is a long time. A lot of stuff happens in 14 seconds. And to put it in really stark, simple terms, an extra second or two is the difference between life and death in some of these circumstances, right? If I wait an extra 2 seconds to tell you there's a pedestrian crossing the road in front of you, you might not have time to evade that pedestrian anymore. They might not have time to jump off the road. So it can have really serious injury and fatal outcomes. And of course, for a fleet, that means liability, right? That means nuclear verdicts, damage payments, as well as people always forget about this part, the psychological strain and pressure for the driver. And none of us want to injure or kill a person. And you see that people quit their jobs, people have to take leave. In the worst cases, it's even more dramatic. People actually commit suicide because they're so depressed about what they've done. So anyway, coming back to the study, we love their rigor. We love their precision and the fact that this was exactly comparable. They used exactly the same protocol, and put our system in, and we're delighted. We've done a lot of work, obviously, with our own measurements, collecting data, having customers measure. We've done our own track tests, but on our own, not under the same level of scientific rigor as the VTTI Institute has done. So it's a great result.
And I think it's interesting. There's a cool chart in your release, and I'll have to grab a copy of it so we can toss it up here. It's major collision factors. So there was inattention was 70% of it says average contributions to collision related losses. So when you're thinking about what happens, I'm assuming external risks were 18% and aggressive driving was 12. So I think that's fascinating because it looks like nearly half was distraction at 47%, and then holding your cell phone. I had no idea that when we're looking at the impacts of these things, over 2/3 are stuff that inside the cab, the driver themselves. I always thought it was like, well, as the other people I need to worry about. I didn't know it was myself.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it's interesting, on the one hand, it's been known for decades that most collisions are a result of human error, right? There's data between 94, 96% of driving is human error. And really, the number of times that something breaks on your car that causes you to crash is super rare. And you gave the example of airplanes and pilots. Same thing there, right? It's rare that a plane sort of breaks apart and falls out of the sky, particularly in the U.S. where we, generally have really good quality checks, maintenance, et cetera. And same thing for cars. In the meantime, they've gotten really good compared to 1900 when you actually broke down every couple miles. You needed to have a repair guy with you. Um, but what people haven't realized is exactly the point you just made, which is what's the distribution of the other guy versus yourself? And what's interesting is, if you look at frequency of incidents, and a lot of companies only look at frequency, they don't look at damage, you get some things that bubble to the surface that are actually not that damaging. The two most common types of collision claims are, first of all, glass breakage, right? You get a little rock from the guy in front of you, and your windshield needs to be replaced. It's a hassle, but it's not super expensive, right? For most people, it's a $50 deductible on glass breakage, and it takes 20 minutes for the glass guy to replace, or worst case, an hour. The other one that's really, really common is backing into things. But almost by definition, when you're backing into things, you're not going that fast. And so you're backing into a bollard. For bigger vehicles where there's poor visibility, we see a lot of backing into trees or backing into a building overhang. And that can cause more damage than the glass breakage, right? If you back into a tree and destroy the top of your vehicle, that can be more expensive. But typically backing into things with your bumper may not even cause much damage. We see this in our delivery fleets. The most common claim payout is for somebody's mailbox, which,
No.
is probably $25, $35, something like that, right? A lot of mailboxes get run over in America. So If you happen to be a mailbox, watch out. But it's not expensive. And then if you look at the other side, what are your most expensive claims? I think we all know it's when you hurt somebody. And so that can happen either because, to your example, you're on your phone, you stop paying attention to the road and you run off the road. And that often leads to, first of all, smashing into stationary things that don't yield, right? If you're in a car and you fight a building, the building wins, no question. And the other thing that can happen is rollovers. And in rollovers, people get seriously hurt. They can get thrown from the car if they're not wearing their seatbelts. The whole car gets totaled. Most rollovers result in totaling the car or the van or the truck. And so in that case, you're talking about millions of dollars of damage right away. And if the driver's an employee, you're talking about huge workers' comp claims as well. It's interesting, we work a lot with really large companies, kind of Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies. And for most of them, unless their workers are doing something else that's dangerous, for most of them, 70% of their workers' comp claims are from driving and from collisions while driving. Because if you think about it, if the rest of the time you're working in an office, you're doing paperwork, or you're working on a laptop, that's not that dangerous an activity, right? Now, if you're working in a factory where you're cutting things, or interestingly, we see this in package delivery fleets, their biggest workers' comp claim source is slips and falls on ice in the sort of last few steps of delivering the package. So it turns out that's the most dangerous
The
part of the
last
trip, is
mile of the last mile.
yeah, like those couple of steps up to your house is where they get hurt. And then, of course, secondarily, they do have collisions, and that's where you can get hurt as well. And then the biggest part is vulnerable road users on the outside. Now, luckily for all of us, those are super rare, right? It's 1% of collisions involve any kind of pedestrian, bicyclist, motorcyclist. But when they happen, those are really, really serious incidents. In particular, once you're going above 30, 35 miles per hour, if you hit a person, they're very likely to be killed or very seriously injured. So those are those nuclear verdicts where you've hurt somebody. So that's that chart, and you're right. It basically says, hey, most of the risk isn't on the outside; the risk is on the inside if you're not paying attention. I'll close with one other really interesting statistic, because this just shows you this relationship between inside and outside even more. Once we've made a fleet better, which for us takes only about a week for most of the drivers to improve their driving, the reason for that is very simple. They already know how to drive well. They're just not paying attention, distracted, holding something in their hand, right? So it's pretty easy to get somebody to say, hey, I'm going to stop using my phone. I'm going to stop eating my burger while driving. I'll pull over to the side of the road to do that. But what's really interesting about that is not only do they improve their own collisions that they cause, they can correct for other people's mistakes. And so take a classic example. Somebody else is not paying attention, runs a red light or runs a stop sign or drifts into your lane. We've all had those experiences, right? And that's where you get upset and you go, oh, that idiot. But the reality is, if you're paying attention, you see that. And in most of those circumstances, you can stop, you can swerve. Maybe you're right away, but you still can stop at a green light to let the guy who's running the red light pass. And so we see between about 11 and 15% reduction in third-party fault collisions, which is very interesting. So, should be a caution to all of us. Pay attention on the road, because, yeah, you may think the other guys are crazy and they're dangerous, but it turns out you can protect yourself.
And if you think about looking at that data, and now that 70% happens, the distractions within the vehicle itself, now when you see these other behaviors, you're also thinking, well, I wonder if they're distracted, because now it's a situation where very rarely, like the long tail, you have the aggressive driver or the actual deficient, driver. But most of the time, you look in your rearview mirror and they're just looking on
Yeah,
down. So that's kind
exactly.
of, it's like a second and third. It reminds me of that Nassim Taleb guy where it's like the long tail. It's like, everyone thinks this big thing's going to get you, but it's that one little thing on the edge that if that thing happens, we got some serious problems. I don't tie that into front-facing cameras, because I got some more data set. I love Attree data as well. One of the fascinating ones was driver-facing camera footage, when available, exonerated drivers in 52% of insurance claims and 49% of litigation cases, as well as leading to settlements instead of going to trial. 86% of the cases did not go to trial, they settled out. And so during the survey, though, the problem is out of road facing cameras, 72% of fleets were like, yeah, I love road facing cameras. But only 32% of the survey people were like, I'm not going to use driver facing cameras. But looking at the chart, it's like, well, you're only covering, let's look again here, 18 to, or let's say 30% of all your risk factors from aggressive driving and external, but you're still not paying attention to the 70% that's
Yeah.
going to get you really in trouble.
That's right. That's right. So, two comments on that, and it's a great point that you just made. First, once we've actually made the drivers better through the coaching and feedback, which is all coming from our system, you get real-time coaching as you encounter a hazard. It'll say, pull over to use your phone if you're using your phone, or watch out for the pedestrian. Interestingly, the statistic you cited actually goes up. We see that after a couple months of people driving with Nauto, 80% of the collisions that happened can now be exonerated, because the ones that they're responsible for have actually disappeared for the most part. So it isn't 50% in the statistic that you quoted, it's actually over 80%. So that's really great, right? This really helps the drivers prove, hey, that guy cut in, that guy ran the red light, it wasn't my fault, and they can exonerate themselves. Obviously, best case, if they're paying attention, they can avoid the collision altogether, but at least we can exonerate them. The other example I'll give is the most common type of collision that we can't prevent yet, but we're still working on ideas to do so, is getting rear-ended while you're stopped somewhere, typically stopped at a red light. You're kind of a sitting duck at that point, right? Because you can't go into the intersection. You'll get you get T-boned from the side. And you can't really do anything about the guy behind you that's on their phone distracted. And what I was going to say is, we see that because the camera looking at the inside, if the vehicle has rearward visibility, you can also see the car coming up from behind. In some of these cases, you can actually see how they're looking down at their phone. And of course, that's perfect evidence. Of course, we can prove that you were stationary, so it's the other guy's fault in any case, regardless of why they didn't stop. But you can actually prove they were distracted. And so, we've all seen people watching Netflix or their favorite movie while driving on the road. We've all had that experience. We see a lot of that, actually captured by these events. So it's really, really important. I want to come back to one other statistic you cited. We've helped customers avoid about 40,000 collisions. And we've captured about 30,000 collisions over the last couple of years, where we've done detailed analysis of what happened. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is we've only had 2 cases where actually things went to court. So again, because of the
Wow.
quality of having all the data, everything around you, if you bring that data to the other person's insurance or just for the initial settlement negotiation, it doesn't go to trial. There's such compelling evidence there of what happened that people settle. So it's actually even more rare than your statistics cited if you've got a good system, because once people see the data, it's locks solid. You don't need a trial judge to tell you that shows that your driver was at fault. So, and that's great for fleets, right? It means you get your money back faster. You can settle those claims, and again, because most of the claims that remain after a month or two are going to be other people's fault, that speed of getting your money back to fix your truck actually is really important.
Well, it helps with your safety scores as well, and trying to, with certain accidents, like get your scores adjusted and try to say, hey, this wasn't me, this was somebody else. And I kind of had another thing when we're looking at what goes into it. One of the circling back to how fast the technology is able to identify what it is compared to other providers. I hear a lot about generative AI, various types of AI. What's one of the big things? Is it something where how do you make it go super fast? Is there any kind of like behind the scenes magic to know cell phone, not a cell phone, or if I'm just kind of like nodding off versus cell phone? Like
Yeah, no,
that
great
was kind
question.
of
So
question.
we use the same kind of networks called transformers as generative AI, but we apply them to visual data, not text data, obviously. Right, we're looking at what's in the scene, but it's a similar architecture. The key for these neural networks, this AI, is really how do you define and train the classes of what you're detecting? And so one of the tricks we use is what's called a multi-class object detector. It's a fancy phrase that basically says you can see multiple things at the same time. So it can say, oh, there's a pedestrian over here, there's a truck over there, there's a car there, the lane stripes here. And so we can make one model do more work. And that allows you to do really quickly, keep running that model many times a second. And it'll immediately identify all of the risks that you're seeing in that scene. And then, of course, we process the output of that and say, okay, so which of these are actually a danger? Because, you may see a car in the forward image, but that may be a parked car off on the side of the road, in which case it doesn't matter. Or there's a pedestrian walking on the sidewalk where if you alert in that case, again, backseat driving, the driver will get really upset, right? So you've got to then do some filtering on all the things you've detected to say, okay, are any of these actually a safety hazard and a threat? So that's one piece. The second is, we've designed our hardware to specifically support AI on the edge. And that comes in two things that you don't see in competitive devices. One is we put more compute into the device. People always ask us, why is your device 10% more expensive than other people? And by the way, it depends on what volume you buy, because we obviously give a volume discount. But if you're buying just a few, we do tend to be just a touch more expensive. The reason is very simple. We buy a more expensive processor to put into this device so that we can run more AI and we can run it faster because we knew from the beginning, time matters, right? And if I have a more powerful processor, we basically use the same kind of processor that you'd find in a high-end tablet computer, iPad or equivalent. And that allows us to run the AI on the edge in real time. The third part is we designed our system 10 years ago already, before anybody was talking about AI, to be AI first. So all of our sensor data, the GPS, the visual sensors, all feed into the AI first. And then the AI actually decides, hey, is there something worth recording, logging, capturing here? That has two implications. One is I don't have a delay, right? I'm not recording video first and then running AI on it, or even worse, some older systems out there. I'm not going to name any names, but if you buy from some big telcos out there, you get systems that actually upload the data to the cloud, run the AI in the cloud, and then send the message back, which of course then you're going to have 10, 12 seconds delay, right? It's not going to happen as fast as
Oh,
processing
it's
it.
got to go through the
Yeah,
telematics through
yeah,
like a cell signal because it's
that's right.
piggybacking, and then it's
That's
just
right.
constantly pushing data.
Yeah,
Oh
that's right.
crap.
So that's that, obviously that causes more delay. Um, the other part that winds up being really important here, and people don't understand this link necessarily, so I want to make that explicit. If your AI isn't very good, let's say you have sort of 60% accuracy as opposed to 100% accuracy. One hack to make sure you're not falsely alerting is just to study for more time. Right. So it's telling you, hey, Thomas is distracted. And I'm like, oh, okay, 60% likelihood. I'm not sure. Well, let me watch Thomas for another 10 seconds. And if it keeps saying he's distracted, then I give you an alert because after 10 seconds of distracted, I'm pretty sure you're distracted, right? Versus if it's going distracted, not distracted, distracted, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll. So by having
Oh
really,
no.
really accurate, highly trained AI, we don't have to wait. If we detect a risk, we see that you're holding your phone, we see you're eating food, we see you looking down at your phone, we can intervene immediately. We don't have to wait to confirm that. And that's part of the reason you see this big gap in speed performance, because the moment we see something, we're already very sure that it's the case. And we'd have to wait additional seconds to confirm it. So
And that's how, like, especially, we got a little bit of time, but I could do a whole episode on. I'm curious about what goes into behind the transformers and the weights. And so it's almost like, I guess the equivalent's like, imagine you're making whiskey and you don't know how to filter it right. So you can have a really good whiskey and a really bad whiskey, but it's all about the quality of your filtration system to make sure you're getting the right flavor. And with your AI and stuff, if you don't have the right weights and you don't have the right capabilities, then you only get to make like a Captain Morgan instead of like a really nice bourbon because that's all your capabilities are within your model. So that's your hardware and your software
that's right.
capabilities.
That's right. Yeah. And I would say the sort of waiting to confirm it from other signals is kind of like blending whiskeys to try to make it taste better. So
And it's
Yeah.
like, we know we can't make a good one, but the guy next door has a little bit, so we're gonna throw some of his. Or like
Yeah.
wine, I can't make some good grapes. My soil's pretty bad, so I'm just gonna
Yeah.
put it all together and I'm gonna call it a Napa Valley. When in fact, I don't have the expertise and the capability to just have it all my own.
That's right.
It's
That's
similar
right.
to AI. We can make. I really love these conversations because it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand how. Like with instance, it reminds me of the BlackBerry film when you have. They were trying to figure out the data packet issue, and then the cell phones and the telecoms. And similarly with these telematics, if you don't have the capability and the compute in house to do it, then you're gonna have to send it to someone else or send it somewhere else, and then they have to send it back to you. And sure, you may save some money, but that 12 seconds is like 3 football fields.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and by the way, the sending data elsewhere is another topic we haven't talked about. A lot of fleets are very sensitive to where their data goes, right? So in our system, everything's encrypted. The moment anytime anything is recorded, it's already encrypted on the device. If anything's uploaded, it's encrypted during the upload, and then in the cloud, it's also encrypted in the storage. And all of our AI development is in the US domestically. And so it doesn't go, to China or some remote location where, data privacy laws are different. And so a lot of people worry about that. And if you're buying a system that's, made in China, you can be pretty sure for their AI development, any of that data is going to China to have the training done there. So that's another risk. You don't see, small trucking fleets worried about that generally because the safety is more an immediate cost. But once you get to large customers, that's a really, really important question, right? Where does the data go? And who's looking at it, and what are the privacy rules? Because as you already alluded to, generally people aren't worried about the outside, like they can see the traffic and the stop signs, but if it's recording me on the inside, I want to know who gets to see that.
Oh yeah, somewhere out there, People's Republic analyst is going to be really sad because they can't map out my internal supply chain. But
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
is what it
that's right.
is. But
Yeah.
we got to wrap it up.
What if
Stefan, is an absolute pleasure to have you back on. We're gonna have to do a whole deep dive on how AI works sometime because I don't think people understand the value of it. But for folks who want to learn more about not only the safety study or about Nauto, what's the best way to get more info?
if I may, Thomas, and I know you're going to edit,
Oh yeah, yeah.
so you may want to insert this earlier in the chain somewhere, but one thing we didn't touch on that is also a consequence of having this AI run really fast on the edge is we can actually run our system with no recording on the inside. And that's pretty counterintuitive for most people, right? They think dash camera, oh, that means I'm being recorded. Because all the sensors feed into the AI first, you can have the AI watching, giving feedback to the driver, giving warnings, but never actually create a video stream. And we have a number of fleets in Europe that operate that way. And we actually increasingly see unionized fleets in the US who generally are like, I don't want an interior camera. Once you sit down with them and you say, hey, do you want interior collision warnings and alerts without recording, without video? And they go, well, I didn't know that was possible. That's great. I'd love that because you're getting the alerts warning you about a collision, but you're not intruding in the privacy because there's no recording.
Okay, that's cool. That's gonna be a whole. We're gonna get in touch. This is another
Okay,
30 minutes, and I think
sounds
we can
great.
cook on this because there's a lot of questions. I know a few unionized carriers in my research on the ATRI data were talking about how they don't want forward-facing cameras because of
Yeah.
those concerns. So
Yeah,
that's
the objection is usually, are you watching me picking my nose? Are you recording me during my break? Right? Who gets to see that? Am I going to be fired based on it? So definitely can do a whole 30 minutes on that because we've had a lot of these discussions. And
well, I don't want it
you
to get
know,
in discovery either. So if I get in the accident and I know it's their fault, but even though my thing went off, like it would be very handy if I just actually cannot provide it because it's a structural feature.
yep,
That fleets are worried because that way you're not in trouble. So when it turns out that it was their fault, but then you look down for a split second, then you're going to be like, you know.
yeah,
So
that's right.
there's a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
that's
great.
cool. Yeah, perfect. Well, we'll wrap it up. Folks want to learn more about Nauto as well. Best way, give me the sites and the details.
Best way is just to go to nauto.com on the web. We also have lots of YouTube videos if you want to check out the operation system. And on our site, www.nauto.com, you can get in touch with us by phone, by email. We're happy to come out and do a ride along. which is really experiencing Nauto in the vehicle. You have to kind of experience it, feel it, see it to believe it, because it's amazing how subtle it is and how quickly it'll detect the risks.
Perfect. Well, Stefan, really appreciate you getting to come on the show, catch up again as well. And if folks want to learn more, check them out, folks, at Nauto. And that's a wrap for today's show. So this is the remote edition. But if you're joining us or you're just watching this, this is on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify, wherever you can find your podcast. While you're at it, sign up for the Loaded and Rolling newsletter. It goes out Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's a wrap for this episode. But don't worry, folks. We'll see you again soon.